Hello and welcome to Ask Mama Amy, a podcast promoting practical advice and resources for strong mothers. I'm your host, Amy Shao, single mom and estate planning attorney and founder of Shao Law. Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to have my friend Leah with us today. She has so much to share with us. I've been personally very inspired by her story as a mom, and so I'm so excited to have her here with us on the Ask Mama Amy podcast. So Leah, thank you so much for being on our show today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I felt it was really nice to feel like I had a story that was worth sharing with you. So I really appreciate, the invitation.
Yeah, of course. So Leah, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Tell us about your son and what's your journey as a mom? Just share your story with us.
All right. My name is Leah Shuchter. I'm a native San Diegan. I have a 5.5-year-old son named Ira, and like a few other moms on your podcast, we met when our kids were tiny babies, breastfeeding and giving space to all the tears that came along with those early days.
It was such a special time. Yeah.
Such a special time. I started out as a single mom by choice, which meant that I really had the goal of motherhood at the forefront of my sort of life planning. At a certain point, I was married very briefly, and I figured that what I really wanted out of life was to be a mom. And so I sort of skipped over the part of finding a life partner to do that with. So I actually have a really terrific relationship with what we call a known donor. So a lot of moms choose to do this through a sperm bank or through anonymous sources. And I actually chose to do this with a friend of mine who still lives in New York, where I initially sort of started this process. So he's a single guy out there and is actually delightfully involved from afar, in that he willingly and happily receives updates, and we visit fairly regularly, probably about once a year. So they have like a very nice relationship, but he is definitely a donor and not a dad. So Ira is very well aware that he grew up in a, what we called a mommy baby household. Mm-hmm. And that was our family until fairly recently. So we were not entirely on our own. I was really lucky in that my family, my parents, were very supportive on this journey. I think because they knew also that this was their one chance at having a grandkid. And so they were very welcoming. And so I actually moved to San Diego from New York to go through all of this, and got pregnant and had the baby and lived in their house until Ira was about 5 years old.
Mm-hmm. So wow. So let me go back to what you said, like the decision to become a voluntary single mom. I mean, most people become single moms involuntarily, either through divorce or whatnot, but making such an intentional and voluntary decision is actually really awesome. Then you get the full control. You don't have to go through like custody battles, and just the clarity and intentionality of it is really admirable. It takes a lot of courage. And so can you share with us, what was it? How did you even get the courage and the support to finally decide to get to that point where you feel comfortable enough and courageous enough to be a single mom on your own?
I think a lot of it was naivete. I actually was not. I have worked as a birth doula. I have worked as a prenatal yoga instructor. I have worked as a prenatal health coach. I didn't have a lot of experience on the other side. Like, I knew what it took to make and grow a healthy baby, have a birth, process that birth, but I didn't know what was happening on the other side. Had I had maybe more information about what what parenting was actually going to be like, who knows? But I had such a strong, sort of physical desire and need. Like, it was a brainstem activity that led me through that. And I think it took a little bit of like I said, naivete, but also just like a real understanding of what my body and my brain was asking for ultimately, like in my life experience, and that I could talk myself out of a partner, but I couldn't talk myself out of a baby. And so I joined a community of single moms by choice. I read a lot. I read a lot about being single. I read about a lot about living, as a solo person. So it was really first a journey about personal like independence. I lived on my own. I took care of myself. I had, obviously great friends and dogs and a community, but I knew that there was more than I wanted. And I didn't, going into this, I thought I was going to have all the strength to do it by myself. And very luckily and thankfully, I met this group of moms exactly when I needed them, which was about 5 weeks after my son was born, because it turns out that like it is very hard. So I think what was great was sort of really having the great benefit of having this be my primary focus. And I had like a great blessing of having my parents financially support me during this time, because I was able to quit my job, and I was really focused on being a primary parent and a full-time parent.
Yeah.
And so it required a lot of help. It required definitely a lot of assistance to do that. But yeah, I think it was like a lot of reading and a lot of really building myself up to be able to do this, and knowing that like if there were more pieces that I wanted to add back in, that there would always be time for that.
Yeah, and I mean, you yourself is highly educated, and you had a successful career prior to deciding to become a full-time mom.
Mm-hmm.
And so you thoroughly thought it through, and then this is the calling, and it almost seems biological, like the whole mental space just called you for that, and you educated yourself.
Definitely.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and I think that's just sort of been a component. Like I've done a lot of mixing it up. I've done a lot of personal transformations. And so I felt like this was just sort of one more awesome opportunity I could sort of shift to do. I've worn a lot of hats in my life, but so putting on this mother hat has also it's been the most humbling, leveling. Like it's
The hardest job.
the hardest. It's there's nothing quite like, and I'm sure like maybe you've experienced this, like having this very successful career and really feeling like who you are in the world, and you've got these sort of external deliverables and accountability to other people and places and things, and you sort of know how to do all of that. And the parenting is just the most on the job training in a state of like daily failure, like daily challenges. Like it's unrelenting.
Yeah.
And just as like you think you're going to just when you think you've gotten it with your kid just right, and you like are in the groove, then they learn and grow, and you've got to like run to catch up.
It's countless figures. So on the journey, after you had Ira, then when you meet other parents as a voluntary single mom, like when you go out and meet other moms or meet other parents, what was the most challenging part, like in your conversing with them, and how do you do you share that or do you not share that? How do you navigate that? The social expectations and all that.
Yeah, I think what was really important was letting other moms know that it was okay to do it on their own. And I think like part of that is acting as not necessarily as a role model, because I'm also don't know what I'm flying by the seat of my pants too, but I feel like it was helpful to know that helpful for maybe other moms to know that it was doable by themselves, like if they were experiencing challenges in their relationship in addition to the challenges of parenthood. And I also found a small sort of single moms community group too, so that we could sort of really understand these challenges of being on all the time. But I think it was also really important for other families and kids to know that like not every family has two parents. Not every family we know has either that there are all different kinds of families to be living in. And so it was helpful for my son to meet other kids of single parents, other kids of single moms by choice, and of course, like all different types of families with, you know, 2 moms, 2 dads, however that comes across. So I think it was nice to be an example of that.
And so the setting the expectations and sort of just letting other people know, and that in and of itself brings a lot of support,
Yes.
even to other people.
Yeah, I think so. But then, you know, there's also just this idea of, you know, there was a little bit of a struggle, you know, so I think even like at the beginning where like somebody's husband would go away for the weekend, they were like, I'm a single mom for the weekend. And you're like, well, okay, but okay, but yeah. So, but it was good. I mean, I think like I was really able to tap into like, you know, we talk a lot about like community building, all these different communities, right? The community can be as big or as small as you want or need it to be, right? So I've done a lot of work. I know we talk about sort of like this mom community. So I have all these different sort of mom groups and all of these different support systems. And so exploring like where I could be helpful and exploring where I could be, take on more of like a leadership position, or, you know, so that led me into working with my local neighborhood community group, the Mission Hills Town Council. And so that was sort of started out as sort of a casual volunteer experience. And then eventually I worked my way up to becoming the president of the Mission Hills Town Council, and really trying to work as a liaison, as a helper, to get the people of my community more connected with the people making the rules about the community. So other local leaders, other political leaders, our representation, you know, our representatives to, you know, to various state and local governments and federal governments and things like that. So really just tapping into this network of other human beings. So it's about connecting on all these different levels.
Yeah, share with us a little bit more about your work in the community. I attended the pie contest. I remember that.
Quite the highlight of my career.
It was so much fun.
Hosting a pie contest, of course. Yeah, I think like, you know, and it's interesting because I lived in and grew up in Mission Hills in San Diego. And so I came back there as an adult and was there with all of these, you know, moving back into my parents' house, which was just a very strange and humbling experience of just kind of being an adult teenager at home. But what was really important to me was that I got to know my neighbors. And so we did a lot of sort of community building activities. So, you know, then you're on your feet. You really need to like figure out all this digging down to figure out that you actually have all of the skill set of event planning or communication or moderating or hosting or all these kinds of things, hosting community forums, those kinds of things. And so really the purpose of this community group was to create and sustain spaces where people could meet their neighbors so that we could care about our neighbors, right? So that we could care about them, to take care of them and to take care of ourselves. And so I just moved to a new neighborhood. And so we're sort of really beginning the process of like meeting everybody and not having an established identity in that space. So, yeah. And then the other sort of things that I was able to work on during the early years of parenting is I worked with the San Diego March for Science and the San Diego Women's March. So really helping with just a lot of logistics. So really what I did find was that my strengths were in not necessarily taking on leadership roles, but being a good helper. so that like my management job is really the parenting role, and that like I have the bandwidth to be directed to do helpful things.
And people say, you know, a good leader is a good servant, right? And so you're helping, you're serving by helping. And what a great model for Ira to see, like for your son to see, like mom is not just, mom is an influencer in the community and just doing all these things to help people. And do you bring Ira to these events?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely very hard to keep a 5-year-old, in tow. So that's when we get the wagon out. And, I've dragged him around countless marches around the city. He's been there in, community forums. And I really try to get him engaged because I think it's a lot harder to do that later in life. And I think that, promoting empathy is such a huge, that's a huge project for a kid. And so we really need to come at it from like so many different angles. And so like really having him understand all these different, understand to what a 5-year-old can understand about all these different facets about how our society is working or not working and how we can contribute as individuals.
And there, you have a really big heart to hold all these different components and spaces of different people. And so would you say, what was the most challenging part, or if you would share a vulnerable moment, a challenge on this journey as a mom?
Well, I think what's really challenging is to share that it's to be able to sort of share that energy also with your kid when the investment is so long. I mean, the investment is so long term, right? You don't always sort of get out of your kid an immediate gratifying response from them for all the work that you're putting in, right? There's no big event at the end of it. There's no pie contest where you're like, okay, that's done, right? You're like,
at the end of the day, Ira is not going to put on your shoulders and say,
right. Right. So that it's really that the challenge is to know that this work goes on for seemingly forever, that that what we get back out of it is something that we have to figure out at the end of the day. And so I had this conversation with my partner recently about sort of having fun parenting, right? And that sometimes that's really a challenge, is to actually experience fun as an adult, playing with your kid or experiencing the fun and not just experiencing their joy having fun, right? And so a lot of that is this, realizing that you're making an investment in the kid's life rather than sort of like looking for some sort of immediate gratification. Because as a mom, you're not necessarily going to get that.
And that having even been aware of that perspective is important, right? Otherwise, many moms just are so focused on their kids' joy. And then one day when the kids turn 18, and then all of a sudden they lose their identity. And so you're focused on also figuring out fun for yourself while having fun with this.
Yeah, I don't have it yet. I don't have that answer, but it's
going to look for the answer.
Right. It's written down in a notebook. Absolutely. This is a goal.
So tell us about your partner. I know you're in it's a blended family situation. And so what are some of just share with us your experience and maybe some of the challenges and the joy on this new phase of your life.
Yeah. So this has been really quite a shift, is that I, in this journey to single parenthood, I had sort of really written off having a partner. I had sort of like really committed to this path and didn't know when or how to open it, or if it was going to make sense to open it up, or if I was always going to just have this identity as a single mom. And then I, got a little antsy around age 3 and was like, oh, okay, yes, I can be my own human individual outside of being a mom. And so I met this incredible man who is a single dad. And, we had this incredible relationship of just us as adults. And we kind of left our kids out of it for a really long time. For about a year and a half, we really just had an adult relationship where we recognized like, hey, actually, you're a person that I really would want with around my kid. Like, it took a very long time for the gatekeeping piece of it. And so we moved in together just very recently. We've been living together for maybe, I don't know, I want to say 4 or 5 months. And it's been a real eye opener in terms of the amount of sort of walls and barriers that each of us have put up to create the pillars of strength that we needed to be single parents. And sort of knocking those pieces back down again has required a lot of self-reflection, a lot of hard conversations about how to maintain our values, and still sort of feeling like we're both defending our space and defending our kids in this interactions. And yet, ultimately, we both know that we're so open and so loving, and we love each other's kids. But a lot of it is just sort of like, how do we share the kitchen in the morning? How do we
simple things like that?
Simple things like that. So there's so much of these just the daily quotidian tasks of, just waking up and sharing the energy, being grumpy in the morning. How do you create space for somebody else's grumpiness? And I say that, that's his question for me and my cranky attitude. And then giving up a little bit of that piece of, your independence and this piece of your, your individuality, and how to maintain all of that. Now that I'm like an adult, and I'm not going into this relationship as like less of a fully formed kind of young person, that now like we are both very well developed adults with now figuring out how to share this life with our little kids. So, and I shouldn't say little kids. His kid is almost 13. So, and the way we've been thinking about it is like, I have a skill set of a 5-year-old parent, right? Like my skills go up to 5.5 now, like maybe I'll do a little light reading so that I'm prepared for 6, but now I'm living with this almost 13-year-old, and like, I'm rushing to catch up. Like I have that's a big gap for me to be learning and growing. So.
Right. That's an interesting perspective. I didn't think about it that way. Like when blending with another person who has a kid, the different parenting levels.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And sort of like where I fit in as, I've heard this said that, like people have called, referred to like a step parent as a bonus parent or something like that. I read a very helpful book or a blurb somewhere where somebody mentioned the idea of a step parent as a camp counselor role.
Yeah.
So that was something that I spoke with my soon to be stepkid this morning about how, as a camp counselor, you have the responsibility of keeping this kid, fed, healthy, but that you actually get a pretty fun experience of just being able to do crafts and have fun and be outside, and that you aren't necessarily primarily responsible for their for growing them from the start, but that you get to come in with this formed person, respecting that they have an identity and they've had a life before you, and that you get this extra opportunity to have a relationship with such a close relationship with another kid. It's really it's wild, and it's wonderful, and it's extremely fulfilling. Yeah. But also, I want to say it's, again, very challenging. Another person in the kitchen in the morning, right? So
and with 2 sets of people who are so solid and formed.
Right. So like, I think what we did, like, that was really wise was, acknowledge before we moved in together, like, hey, we're getting on a roller coaster, like, hang on tight, right? That if, that we know that we're going to have sort of challenges and struggles blending this family together, but that ultimately, like, we have this like shared goal, but that like, it's certainly like, we know what the destination is, but like the journey is going to be very complicated and it's going to be hard. But this is ultimately not like it's not a temporary project. It's a permanent project.
Right. And you having that talk, that awareness that it's going to be a roller coaster, that in and of itself helps significantly.
Yeah.
And somebody who goes in blindly. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So that is something like a very shared value that Dan, my partner, and I have, is to be like very he's an academic. So we both sort of have this, I think maybe to a fault, like we really like to prepare and overthink, right? That we really have got, like, we try to lay
Analytical
down
side of you.
a very analytical. So we really try to, like, do a lot of project management in this situation, right? So, so right. So it's lucky that we've been able to have, professional careers enough that we have sort of this skill set to take home, to use at home.
That's awesome. Well, so to sum it up, what would you say is the definition of a strong mom?
I think there's a crucial component of recognizing that you don't need to be, whatever you think strong is, that you don't need to be that all of the time. That there's being able to question your experience, or to be able to reflect back on your experience, and to be able to admit to yourself that you may not have done something correctly the first time around. I try to think of parenthood, like being a strong parent, as recognizing that there seems to be sort of limitless, seems like, opportunities for growth or reflection. Being a helper and investing in those communities, and your friends and your support system, so that you can ask for help later when you need it. Some understanding that there's going to just be an ebb and flow to the amount that you can give, or the amount that you can take from those around you. And then receiving that, like actually listening and hearing and receiving, what comes to you from other women, from other parents. And I think, like, what I really try to impart to my son, and this is sort of like, I say it out loud to him because I need to also hear it, that we talk about mindfulness, empathy, and courage. And so his grasp of what that means at 5 may not be any better than what I think that means at 45. I'll tell him to, like, be bold, and just, like, these words and whatever that means. So embracing sort of the unknown of it all, leaning into that grayer space, and being strong means, like, knowing that you'll be able to get to it on the other side, like holding space for something and knowing that you'll be able to address it in whatever way, like, even if it's not at this moment now.
Right. That's awesome. So any final encouraging words for our local community, for moms, maybe they're on the journey, or they're considering becoming a voluntary single mom themselves? Any words for them?
Yeah, I definitely think it's really crucial to find your group, and to also sit and think through kind of the things that you don't want, to know what you do want, right? So, reflecting on sort of your journey thus far, to know how to change directions and do it a little bit differently. And that, we're at a really interesting space in society itself, where we have sort of these radical opportunities to create and grow in a way that I think historically we haven't really been given before. So that we're radically rethinking family structures. We're radically rethinking what a family is, creating, family out of our friend groups, like really leaning harder into being helpful and asking for help. And the old, sort of patriarchal to heterosexual normal, whatever that means, like,
yeah,
model didn't work for me. And really being able to just take what I needed out of all of these pieces of my life and grow something new.
Yeah.
And so from that, like, I really know from this journey, like, it's still challenging all the time, but that, you're able to look back and say, like, oh my gosh, see how far I've come? Like, imagine how to grow even further. So that, like, we're never stuck. We never need to stay where we're at, like, physically, mentally, emotionally. Like, there's always going to be room for growth.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Leah, for being with us today. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for having me.
All right, talk later. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us today on Ask Mama Amy. Head over to AskMamaAmy.com for all the show notes and links you heard in today's episode. You'll also get my free legal tool for you to name legal guardians for your children, so that you can leave them with abundant resources to support them and a total peace of mind. If you liked today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review to tell us why. See you next time, mamas.